At this time, our biggest concern regarding the water is the uncertainty. There is not enough information about the risks and impacts of the radioactive water's discharge into the Pacific Ocean over the long term. What are the impacts on human health? What are the impacts on the right to food? What are the impacts on the environment?
One, it poses risk to North Pacific marine ecosystems. Secondly, it's unnecessary. There are realistic, reasonable alternatives to prevent it. Thirdly, it's likely to be illegal in international law. And lastly, it's extremely unethical and almost immoral to be continuing to dump hazardous industrial waste into the one global ocean these days. The marine dispersion will take place pretty much as the dispersion took place 10 years ago from the Fukushima, the initial disaster. It will spread east across the North Pacific on the Kuroshio and then the North Pacific Current, reaching the coast of North America and North American waters in about 2 to 3 years. Some of this will rain out with contacting sediment and clay particles to the seabed, but most of it will stay in the upper waters and circulate back, some down to Washington, Oregon, and California. Some will split and come north past Canada and to my home in Alaska, and then circulate back to the Bering Sea and to the Arctic Ocean, and ultimately back to Japan and Korea and China.
With regards to tritium, it has a particular characteristic called organically bound, where it actually can become part of the cell structure, at which point it gives direct radiation exposure, increasing the risk of genetic damage. None of that is acknowledged by the Japanese government, which is not surprising because they want to give justification for these discharges. Our principal concern is radioactive contamination and the risk to the local populations along the Pacific coast in Japan, but also because the discharges will move through ocean currents, eventually reaching the East Sea and the East China Sea within 15 to 24 months. Clearly, radioactive contamination of those oceans, those seas, can't be justified. And for the fishing communities around the Korean Peninsula, for example, why should they have to put up with the risk that the livelihoods that they depend upon fishing are put at risk by a decision made in Tokyo? It's totally unacceptable.
We regard this response insufficient because the treatment process, so-called ALPS or Advanced Liquid Processing System, has limitations by design. It is not designed to remove carbon-14. It is not designed to remove tritium. In addition, there are alternative cleaning technologies that can reduce contaminants in the waters to non-detectable levels, which is a standard much stringent and much more protective than the international standards that Japan argues would be achieved with the ALPS treatment. I would also want to add that the first application of the ALPS processing did not succeed. And there is no guarantee that a second application will actually clean the water.
The government has chosen to say that it can clean all of this up within a matter of a few decades. That's not credible. They're ignoring the options of building additional storage. There's no option here that is not without risks. We don't deny that long-term storage also has risks, but the uncontrolled release of radioactivity into the environment is effectively an experiment on the environment and public health, and is clearly not an option that the Japanese government should pursue.
From what we have seen, it seems that the economic costs of doing this, the direct economic costs, not the indirect economic costs of doing this, are lower than any of the other potential alternatives. So there is that component. There is also the fact that within Japan, there has been a long discussion about what to do with this waste. And at some point, the Japanese government had to take a decision. There have been protests from Taiwan, from Korea, both Koreas, and from China. But with the political backing of the US, there is no international condemnation. The political cost is really low for Japan.
So far, it looks like they do care about, again, the upcoming Olympic, the Tokyo Olympic, which was delayed about the remaining days before the Olympic, only less than 100 days. So probably they want to show to the rest of the world, again, the Fukushima is still very much under control. And another probably political calculation can be considered as a reason. Again, for Prime Minister Suga himself, again, he needs to be prepared for the upcoming election, which cannot be, again, later than the September. So obviously he or his colleagues might have thought about all this, political timing.
There's no good alternative to dealing with this. But Fukushima is an absolute mess. But the realistic alternative, the best bad alternative, is to go to long-term storage onshore, build more tanks, and continue to store this water over the next 15 to 30 years, over which time the tritium half-life will have decayed maybe 75% of the tritium, and incorporate best available technology in treating the water. And right now, their treatment system there at Fukushima is not up to the job. They need to begin incorporating best available technology, including ion exchange systems and detritiation systems used here in the United States. So, and then they also need an international scientific and technical commission to oversee, as an independent body, to oversee the Fukushima cleanup. Right now, the International Atomic Energy Agency really isn't trusted as an independent arbiter in this issue. And certainly Japan and TEPCO are not. So we need an independent scientific body to oversee this extraordinary mess that's going to be going on for the rest of this century at Fukushima.
There is certainly room for constructive diplomacy carried out in constructive spirit. There's also room for legal action. One of the keystone obligations in modern international law is the duty of states to prevent transboundary harm. This obligation carries several steps, such as the elaboration of an environmental impact assessment. International law also requires, it obliges states to carry out consultations in good faith, in a constructive spirit, prior to any plan or decision that may pose a significant risk to the environment. So there is really no obstacle to countries in the region seizing legal avenues to protect the rights and the rights of their citizens.